Hi, I'm Willie. Welcome to my channel. Thank you for being here. I appreciate each and every one of you. And what I want to talk about in this video is enterprise gear. And I want this to be a conversation from me to you, you to me. I want to know what you think about this. The word enterprise gets slapped on all types of hardware these days. And as far as I know, I've been looking around, there's not any like governing body that actually says this is enterprise, whether that's for an organization or whether for hardware, right? So I think this is one of those things where the majority of the time people kind of agree and kind of have similar ideas about what enterprise is. I've got some notes here, but I think what we have to do first before we can call something enterprise gear is we have to maybe talk about what an enterprise is. And like I said, I don't believe there's any one governing body that says this is an enterprise, right? I think it's a set of requirements for things that are generally understood and generally agreed upon as far as a business goes. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be a business, right? So let's talk a little bit about what you consider, what I consider, what other people consider an enterprise to be. I've got some notes. Um, and when I think of enterprise, I'm it doesn't necessarily have to be a big company, right? But I think when you first hear enterprise, you think like Fortune 500 companies, large companies. Um, I don't think that an enterprise necessarily has to be a large company with tens of thousands of employees, depending on their actual business needs and what they do, right? So, um, are they in an industry where there is a lot of regulatory things that are happening? Are they a business or a nonprofit or a government agency that's providing public services in a way that makes their structure complicated or requires uptime, a lot of uptime or guaranteed uptime, things like that? How are services provided to to them or from them, right? Is there tiered services? Do they have it, dedicated employees that take care of certain things? Do they have an actual C-suite, right, with a CEO, a CFO, a COO, a CIO, a CTO? Just start adding all the C's and whatever O's in there, right? Um, do they call themselves an enterprise? Do they have, through their complexity, through their regulatory um, requirements, are they experts in something that, and they do set standards where they, are classifying other businesses as certain things, or they're handling those frameworks, right? So I think we've got to talk about that. So I think an enterprise can get complicated because I think it can be large. I think it does have to scale, but I don't think that scalability necessarily has to deal with the company itself being huge, right? I think we would maybe agree, and let me know if I'm wrong about this down below or if you disagree, but I would think that a web based company that has 10 employees but is generating $150 million in revenue could be considered an enterprise, right? That's a lot of revenue depending on what you do. And how complex is the system that 10 people are supporting to create $150 million in revenue if you're a web-based company. Now, for a construction company that's building buildings, $150 million in revenue is, depending on where you're at in the world, may not be a lot of money at all, and you may have thousands of employees, right? So, what do you think an enterprise is? Like I said, is it scalability and size? Is it the formal structure? Do they have another note I've got is, do they have standardized processes? Because you have people who are ISO certified, and at a certain level of ISO certification, you basically have an entire manual that defines your all of your business processes and how to run the business, right? Small companies can do that too. Back to their compliance and their risk management, those frameworks that they may be subject to, HIPAA, SOX, GDPR, PCI, name a compliance framework. How robust do their systems have to be for auditability, governance, cybersecurity? Like I said, are they accessing mission critical systems or providing mission critical systems? Do they have to have that high availability? What, so let's talk about it. So after we've defined what an enterprise is, or we all have a general shared idea, and I think a lot of this is a shared understanding, shared concepts, right? And maybe I'm wrong. If somebody knows, is there an actual organization that labels somebody an enterprise? Or is it this shared idea that we all have? So when we talk about enterprise and network hardware, what does that mean? So I'm not going to name specific product lines in this, but I will tell you that I've recently seen an Ethernet switch that was just released that and see, this is where I'm like weaving that thread of, is this enterprise? Just based on what we talked about, what an enterprise is. I saw a switch that was released. It was labeled enterprise. It doesn't, out of the gate, it doesn't have redundant power. So when we talk about like Ethernet switches, to make it enterprise, does a switch out of the gate have to have some sort of redundant power, so that the switch has a lot of uptime and one power supply doesn't cause this thing to fail, right? Is that like our base mark, our benchmark for starting to be able to use that enterprise term with a switch, right? It has to have redundant power out of the gate. On top of that, does it have to have certain features, right? Does a switch have to be able to stack? Does it have to be able to do layer 3 routing? Does it have to be managed by a single pane of glass setup? Or is it a switch where you can manage it with the single pane of glass and you can watch it, but to really get in and do a lot of high-end, what we would consider high-end configuration? So if an enterprise needs uptime, do your switches, your routers, right? Do you need VRRP or some sort of other high availability integration? Does it need to be able to do routing at, using protocols like BGP, OSPF? Does it need, what other feature sets does it need? What kind of security feature sets does it need? So traditionally, when I would say enterprise network gear, what would pop into your mind, right? Cisco's been around a long time. Juniper's been around a long time. Arista is a huge, player. And when you just think enterprise gear, what vendors pop into your mind? And based on those vendors, what feature set are they providing? It also depends on, can you get 24/7 support with a guaranteed 4-hour turnaround time, right? So if I've got this data server or this data center in an enterprise, what we've defined it as an enterprise, and it has to have that uptime, for your gear to be considered enterprise, do you be able, see, it's hard to kind of get this out, but do you have to be able to get that support, right? So you have equipment that's redundant, that performs at a very high capacity, but along with that, can you get next business day replacement? Can you get a tech on the phone at 11 o'clock your time, and how long will that tech work with you to get a problem fixed? I know if I was in an enterprise where uptime was important, security is important, all these other things, and the company can't have 8 hours of downtime because you're emailing, with tech support, is that a requirement? So let me know what you think about that down below. Other things to consider, I think, for enterprise, right? Do we have that centralized management? Do they provide APIs? is there logging? How good is the logging? I know people want to talk jazz about SNMP, but does it support SNMP and flows? Is there role-based user support, right? So you have a privilege level that allows you to make changes and a privilege level that just allows you to see what's going on. And a lot of these you've been seeing software and hardware around the channel, other YouTube channels, and you're starting to fill some of this in, right? We talked about the advanced the advanced routing. You know, does a piece of equipment, let's say that we had a PoE non-managed switch that had dual power supplies, would you consider that a piece of enterprise equipment, or do you have to be able to manage it? Does it have to be able to do, VLANs, private VLANs, Q and Q? Does it have to be able to provide QoS? Does it have to be able to do policy-based routing, NAT, ACLs? Does it have to be able to do VPN? I'm just throwing some of these notes out here that I've got. Does it have to be able? We talked about stacking. Does it have to be able to cluster? Does it have to have proven high mean time between failures? Does it have to have ultra low latency processing, right? So a switch that's doing that's at the stock exchange, those things have to move and have very, very low latency compared to equipment that's working with a rocket. But when you look at what a rocket is actually doing, and even though they have to have special protocols and things that can deal with high latency, is that equipment that runs a rocket, is that enterprise? Is it the same type of enterprise things you would expect out of switches that run the stock exchange and do trading and do other real-time tasks? Let's talk about AI. So NVIDIA obviously has its own networking, its own switches that provide the networking that they have to do AI. And they are very, very, very high throughput, and they're redundant, and they break system processes up, and they're specially designed for the workload that AI has. So let me know what you think. Did we touch on all the things? What am I forgetting in this? How do you define enterprise? How do you define enterprise gear? And what manufacturers and hardware do you think are enterprise? And if an organization, let's just take Cisco for example. If you have a stack of, and I saw this, so it came to mind, like 3560 switches, and they're stacked. Obviously, I think we're going to consider those probably at enterprise level. If you've never worked with a stack of 3560s, you can share power between the devices, between the switches. You can obviously manage a stack as one switch. So there's some features right there, but then Cisco also has a small business line. But because Cisco has called it the small business line, does that mean we exclude the small business line from enterprise, right? So where are we drawing lines? I think we have to define these things, or maybe we just throw out enterprise completely and we define everything based on need and based on feature sets that need to be present, that need to be used. And maybe then that's what, on the other end, that's what defines enterprise. Let me know what you think down below. We could ramble on about this for a long time, but I really want this to be a conversation about what you think is enterprise and how we fit that bill. And I think a lot of us may have different ideas, because I can tell you that from a software feature set, I believe that there is equipment that is enterprise, but from the hardware side, I don't think it is, because it doesn't have dual power supplies. It doesn't have, so I'm not going to put some of these things in where the requirement is it's got to have 5 nines of uptime or better, which I don't know how you can guarantee better than, it would be very expensive to be able to do that. But from the software side, it may meet those requirements, but it's only got a single power supply. And maybe that power supply is a DC jack instead of, so there's all those things in there. And I can look at every manufacturer that we work with and I could say, okay, I would consider installing this in an environment that has security requirements and has uptime requirements and all these things. And I can look at those same companies and say, yeah, I would never install that in this instance, right? If we're talking about an enterprise. So let me know what you think down below. I guess we could go on and on and on about this. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, comment, and share. Follow me on Twitter and TikTok. Those links are down below, along with affiliate links, Patreon link. And if you need IT consulting, head on over to williehowe.com, fill out our contact form, and someone will be in touch with you as soon as possible. Come on over to community.williehowe.com and let us know what you think an enterprise is. Once again, I'm Willie, and now I'm going to be wired about this all day now that we're thinking about this. But anyway, I'll see you in the next video.